Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we'll be looking at today's news through a philosophical lens.
Looking forward to it.
We've got some really interesting stuff to cover today. Articles about democracy and future generations, and then...
Addiction?
Oh, yeah, and addiction. Oh, and physics.
Can't forget physics.
Right, and even international relations. Pulling from a bunch of different sources, the APA blog, Jamesian Philosophy Refreshed.
Daily Nos.
Yeah, Daily News. Should be fun.
Definitely.
So let's start with democracy. This APA blog article, Democracy and Future Generations, a philosophical minefield, really points out the tension between democracy and, the needs of future generations.
It's a tough one. Democracies might be great at some things like protecting the environment or investing in early childhood education, but
planning for the long term.
yeah, planning for the long term, that's the real challenge. How do you represent the needs of people who haven't even been born yet?
It's almost impossible. Are our systems even built for that kind of thinking?
Especially with all the pressure of, elections and immediate needs.
Yeah, it's like a constant cycle of short-term thinking.
Exactly. And with problems like climate change becoming more urgent, we really need to figure out how to balance the needs of the present and the future.
For sure. Okay, so switching gears a bit, another article from the APA blog talks about addiction.
Oh yeah, this one, reconciling the manifest and scientific images of addiction.
Right, and it basically says we need to look at addiction from both a scientific and a philosophical point of view.
It's about bringing those two perspectives together. Scientists can focus on the biological mechanisms or the societal impacts, while philosophers can dig into the bigger questions.
Like the moral questions.
Yeah, like the moral and existential questions around addiction.
I think that's so important. It's like each discipline is seeing a different piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. We need both the how and the why to really get a full picture of addiction.
And to develop better treatments and interventions for people who are struggling. Now let's get a little abstract. We have some articles on the philosophy of language.
Ah, always a fun one.
This article, Philosophy of Language, Landon D.C. Elkind, goes deep into how we use language to create meaning.
Which is something we do all the time without even thinking about it.
Right. It's so complex, but we just take it for granted.
Language is really the foundation of how we think and interact with each other. It's amazing how we can communicate such nuanced ideas and emotions.
Yeah, and it's something that philosophers have been debating for centuries.
Still so much to explore.
Okay, so then there's this piece from Paul Austin Murphy's blog, A Deflationary View of Information in Physics.
Intriguing title.
It argues that information isn't some objective thing out there.
But rather a reflection of what we as observers know.
Right. And this connects to some really mind-bending ideas in physics.
Like the idea that information shapes reality.
Which is a pretty radical concept.
It really challenges how we think about objectivity and truth. And it raises questions about consciousness and the universe itself.
Now shifting gears to the global stage, we have a couple of articles from Jamesian Philosophy Refreshed.
Okay, let's hear it.
One analyzes international relations, and the other looks at To Catch a Predator.
An interesting pairing.
So the international relations piece, Regions and Powers 7, it uses this thing called regional security complex theory to understand what's happening in the post-Soviet world.
It's fascinating how the collapse of the Soviet Union created this power vacuum.
And led to new alliances and potential conflicts.
Especially in regions like Eastern Europe.
What's crazy is that this article was published back in 2003, and it actually predicted that the West's relationship with Ukraine could provoke a strong reaction from Russia.
Wow, they really saw that coming.
It just shows how important historical context is when we're trying to understand current events.
Sometimes the seeds of conflict are planted long before the conflict itself.
Now, the Chris Hansen and To Catch a Predator article takes a more cultural perspective.
Okay, this should be interesting.
The author argues that the show, while trying to expose wrongdoing, might have unintentionally made people sympathize with the predators.
By portraying them as pathetic figures.
Exactly. It makes you think about the power of media to shape our perceptions.
And whether a show aimed at exposing something bad could actually end up undermining its own message.
It also raises ethical questions about using deception and hidden Congress.
Like, where do we draw the line between justifiable tactics and exploitation?
That's a question that goes beyond reality TV. It applies to journalism, law enforcement, even our own personal lives.
When does the pursuit of truth become ethically problematic?
Right. It's a tough balance. Now let's move on to Daily News. There's this article called Mini Heap that touches on a bunch of different topics.
Okay, what stood out to you?
Well, one thing was the discussion about AI being used in knowledge work.
Right, and how it's raising concerns about over-reliance on AI.
Even though it can increase efficiency, there's a potential downside.
Like the decline in critical thinking skills that the study highlighted.
Yeah, it's like we're trading our intellectual independence for convenience.
And that could have long-term consequences for our ability to analyze information, solve problems, and be creative.
It makes you wonder if critical thinking is becoming a niche skill
instead of something fundamental.
The article also talks about the philosophical problem of induction.
Which we touched on earlier.
Right. And it uses video games as an example to show how past success doesn't guarantee future outcomes.
A good reminder to always question our assumptions.
The mini-heat piece also links to discussions about immigration, free speech, and consciousness.
Lots to unpack there.
The immigration discussion was particularly interesting. The article argues that many arguments for strict immigration control are based on fantasies.
That's a strong claim.
It challenges us to look at whether our views on immigration are based on reality or on fear and misinformation.
And to consider the human impact of these policies.
The free speech debate was also thought-provoking. It talks about this new journal called the Journal of Controversial Ideas,
which aims to provide a platform for scholars to publish work that might be considered too controversial for mainstream publications.
a noble goal but also potentially problematic.
It raises questions about academic freedom and the limits of acceptable discourse.
Like, what even is a controversial idea and who decides?
Exactly. And the article mentions an example where the journal published a piece about the intelligence of immigrants.
Which sparked a lot of criticism.
It's understandable why that would be controversial.
It touches on sensitive issues of race and equality.
And it reminds us that words have power, even in academic settings.
The mini-heap article also links to a discussion about the nature of consciousness.
Particularly in the context of AI.
Right. As AI gets more sophisticated, the question of whether machines can be conscious is becoming more and more relevant.
It's both fascinating and a little unsettling.
The article talks about the ethical implications of creating AI that might experience the world like humans do.
It raises profound questions about our responsibilities toward these potential entities.
If we create machines capable of feeling, do we owe them the same rights and considerations as humans?
It's a question that's going to keep philosophers busy for a long time.
Now let's shift our focus to the ethics blog. There's an article called Conceivability and Feasibility of Artificial Consciousness.
Okay, so diving deeper into the AI question.
This one asks, is artificial consciousness even possible?
And if so, what ethical guidelines should we follow in developing it?
It's almost like we're playing God trying to create something in our own image.
It's a huge responsibility, and we need to be careful.
We need to think about the potential consequences before we unleash something we might not fully understand.
Agreed.
Okay, let's lighten things up for a minute with some quotes from philosophy bits.
Sounds good.
The first one is from Samuel R. Delany. Desire is a very scary and uneasy notion. Its mark is absence. Accordingly, a positivistic culture frequently finds itself at a loss to explore it or elaborate its workings.
It's about how our culture can shape our understanding of desire.
And how we often struggle to talk about it openly.
The second quote is from David Hume. The advantages found in history seem to be of three kinds, as it amuses the fancy, as it improves the understanding, and as it strengthens virtue.
I love that. It captures the many ways that studying history can benefit us.
It's not just about memorizing facts. It's about engaging our imagination, expanding our knowledge, and becoming better people.
Okay, so speaking of knowledge, let's look at this blog post from Michael R.D. James. It's called A History of Geology Reading List, Part 1.
Sounds like a great resource for anyone interested in geology.
It's a comprehensive list of books and articles that trace the development of geological thought.
Showing how even scientific disciplines have a rich and nuanced history.
Next up, we have an article from The Marginalian discussing Virginia Woolf and her concept of moments of being.
Woolf was all about introspection.
She believed that these moments of heightened awareness and connection are what give our lives meaning.
It's about savoring those moments of joy, beauty, and connection.
And recognizing their power to illuminate even the darkest of times.
A reminder to appreciate the little things.
Now, for a more serious topic, we have a piece from Imperfect Cognitions. When are conspiracy beliefs pathological?
Timely question.
It explores the line between harmless speculation and harmful delusion.
Looking at the factors that contribute to the spread of conspiracy theories.
It's a complex issue.
We need to encourage critical thinking, but also recognize when conspiracy theories become dangerous.
The article emphasizes the need for empathy when engaging with people who hold these beliefs.
Understanding that they often come from a place of fear and uncertainty.
It's about finding that balance between skepticism and open-mindedness.
And remembering that everyone deserves respect, even if you disagree with their beliefs.
Let's venture into academic philosophy now with a blog post from Daily Nous, part of the analytic tradition, but maybe not philosophers.
Interesting.
It questions whether you need a formal academic designation to be considered a philosopher.
Like, are there people who engage in philosophical thinking without being professional philosophers?
Exactly. The article looks at figures like Albert Einstein, Kurt Gödel, and John Maynard Keynes.
They all grappled with big philosophical questions.
It highlights the idea that philosophy isn't limited to universities.
It can exist anywhere people are asking fundamental questions about knowledge, reality, and the human condition.
Now, for a dose of philosophical wisdom, we have a blog post from Philosophy, by the way. It features a quote from Jürgen Habermas, texts offer their resistance to the reader, philosophical texts even more so.
It's a good reminder that philosophy takes effort.
You can't just passively consume these texts,
They challenge our preconceptions and force us to think deeply.
but the rewards are worth it.
Absolutely.
Next up, we have a blog post from a philosopher's blog called Sequencing Infants.
Okay, what's this one about?
It looks at the ethics of using genetic sequencing to test infants for health conditions.
That raises a lot of questions about privacy, consent, and the potential for discrimination.
And it makes us think about what it means to be healthy in an age where we can identify genetic predispositions.
Technology is moving faster than our ethical frameworks can keep up.
We need to think carefully about the consequences before we implement these technologies widely. Now let's dive into epistemology with a blog post from Errors Statistics Philosophy. It's called Return to Classical Epistemology, Sensitivity and Severity. Gardner and Zaharatos, 2022.
Sounds dense.
It's a deep dive into how we can be certain that our beliefs are true.
A fundamental question in philosophy,
The author examines the concepts of sensitivity and severity,
arguing that they're crucial for assessing the strength of our evidence,
and the reliability of our beliefs,
about being grounded in evidence.
and being open to revising our beliefs when presented with new information.
That's key.
Let's explore the intersection of culture and tradition with a blog post from the JHI blog about folk revivalism.
Interesting.
It focuses on the revival of Raibidsha, a martial dance from Bengal.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's a great example of how folk traditions can evolve while still maintaining their cultural significance.
So it's not just about preserving the past, it's about keeping traditions alive.
Right. The revival of Raibidsha has helped to revitalize Bengali culture
Connecting younger generations with their heritage.
and fostering a sense of community.
Powerful stuff.
Finally, let's revisit the problem of induction with a blog post from a philosopher's blog, The Problem of Induction and Video Games.
Okay, how do video games relate to induction?
The author uses the unpredictable nature of video games to show how past experiences don't always predict future outcomes.
Makes sense.
It's a fun way to illustrate a complex philosophical concept
Reminding us to be humble about our predictions.
and to embrace uncertainty.
The future is full of surprises.
We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring all sorts of topics through a philosophical lens,
It's amazing how philosophy connects to so many different areas of life.
from the news to science to culture to our own personal beliefs.
It's not just an academic subject, it's a way of thinking about the world.
It encourages us to question our assumptions, to be open to new ideas, and to engage in thoughtful dialogue.
And in a world that's often full of noise and misinformation, those skills are more important than ever.
Absolutely.
And that can lead to some difficult conversations.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so moving on from Mini-Heap, let's talk about this article from the Epics blog, Conceivability and Feasibility of Artificial Consciousness.
Artificial consciousness, always a fascinating topic.
This article really dives into the big question: is artificial consciousness even possible?
And if it is, how should we approach it ethically? It's kind of like,
Playing God,
yeah, it's like we're trying to create something of our own image.
a very powerful and potentially dangerous thing.
We need to be careful and really think about the consequences before we go too far.
Absolutely. Okay, let's take a break from the heavy stuff for a minute and look at some fun quotes from Philosophy Bits.
Sounds good. I always enjoy a good quote.
This first one is from Samuel R. Delaney. Desire is a very scary and uneasy notion. Its mark is absence. Accordingly, a positivistic culture frequently finds itself at a loss to explore it or elaborate its workings.
That's interesting. Desire is such a fundamental part of the human experience.
But we often don't know how to talk about it.
It's like it's this powerful force that we're both drawn to and afraid of.
Okay, here's another one, this time from David Hume. The advantages found in history seem to be of three kinds: as it amuses the fancy, as it improves the understanding, and as it strengthens virtue.
I love that quote. It perfectly captures the value of studying history.
It's not just about memorizing facts and dates.
It's about expanding our minds, our knowledge, and even our morality.
Speaking of knowledge, let's check out this blog post from Michael R.D. James, A History of Geology Reading List, Part 1.
A reading list. Nice.
It's a really comprehensive list of books and articles that explore the history of geological thought,
It's fascinating to see how scientific ideas have evolved over time.
and how even something as seemingly objective as geology has its own history and controversies.
For sure. Okay, what else do we have?
We have an article from The Marginalian that discusses Virginia Woolf and her concept of moments of being.
Woolf was a brilliant writer and thinker.
She believed that these moments of heightened awareness and connection are what truly matter in life.
The moments that give our lives meaning.
It's about appreciating those small but profound experiences.
And letting them illuminate even the darkest of times.
Now let's address a more serious topic with an article from Imperfect Cognitions. When are conspiracy beliefs pathological?
Conspiracy theories. That's a timely one.
This article tries to draw a line between harmless speculation and dangerous delusion,
It's important to be able to distinguish between the two.
and to understand the factors that contribute to the spread of harmful conspiracy theories.
Like fear, uncertainty, and the desire for simple explanations.
The article emphasizes the need for empathy when engaging with people who hold these beliefs.
Even if we strongly disagree with them.
It's about recognizing that they often come from a place of vulnerability.
And trying to have a respectful dialogue.
Now let's shift gears to academic philosophy with a blog post from Daily Nas, part of the analytic tradition, but maybe not philosophers.
Sounds intriguing. What's the analytic tradition?
It's a particular approach to philosophy that emphasizes logic and clear argumentation.
Okay, so this article is questioning whether you need to be part of that tradition to be considered a philosopher.
Right. It looks at people like Albert Einstein, Kurt Gödel, and John Maynard Keynes, who all engaged in profound philosophical thinking.
But weren't necessarily part of the academic world of philosophy.
It's a reminder that philosophy isn't confined to universities or journals.
It can exist anywhere people are asking big questions.
Okay, let's take a moment to appreciate some philosophical wisdom. This blog post from Philosophy, by the way, features a quote from Jürgen Habermas. Texts offer their resistance to the reader, philosophical texts even more so.
Yeah, philosophy can be tough.
It requires effort and patience.
You can't just skim these texts. You have to really wrestle with the ideas.
But it's worth it.
Absolutely. The rewards are immense.
Next up, we have a blog post from a philosopher's blog called Sequencing Infants.
Okay, what's this one about?
It examines the ethics of using genetic sequencing to test infants for various health conditions.
That raises some serious questions about privacy, consent, and the potential for discrimination.
And it makes us think about what it means to be healthy in an age where we can identify genetic predispositions.
It's like we're entering a whole new world of ethical challenges.
Now let's dive into epistemology with a blog post from Era's Statistics Philosophy, Return to Classical Epistemology, Sensitivity and Severity. Gardner and Zaratos, 2022.
Epistemology, the study of knowledge.
This article gets into the nitty-gritty of how we can be certain that our beliefs are true,
It's about evaluating the evidence we have,
and being willing to change our minds when new evidence comes to light.
which can be hard to do, but it's essential for intellectual honesty.
Now let's explore the world of culture and tradition with a blog post from the JHI blog about folk revivalism.
Folk revivalism. I'm intrigued.
It focuses on the revival of Aribanche, a martial dance from Bengal.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's a great example of how folk traditions can be revitalized while still preserving their cultural significance
It's about connecting with the past, but also adapting to the present.
and creating something new and vibrant.
It's a beautiful thing.
Finally, let's revisit the problem of induction with a blog post from a philosopher's blog, The Problem of Induction in Video Games.
Oh yeah, we talked about that earlier.
This article uses the unpredictability of video games to illustrate how past experiences don't always guarantee future outcomes.
It's a fun and engaging way to approach a complex philosophical concept.
And a reminder that we should always be open to the unexpected.
Life is full of surprises. So much to think about.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from democracy to addiction to AI to folk dancing.
It's been quite a journey.
What really stands out to you from all of this?
I think the idea of uncertainty keeps coming up.
Yeah, in so many different contexts. The problem of induction, the ethics of AI, even the future of democracy.
We're living in a world that's constantly changing, and it's hard to predict what's going to happen next.
But instead of being afraid of that uncertainty, maybe we should embrace it.
See it as an opportunity for growth and learning.
Exactly. It's about being open to new ideas and being willing to change our minds,
And that requires critical thinking.
which is something we've talked a lot about today.
Being able to evaluate information carefully, to separate fact from fiction, to identify biases.
Especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information from all sides.
We need to be discerning consumers of information,
And we need to be able to engage in thoughtful dialogue with people who hold different views,
even when it's difficult.
because that's how we learn and grow.
So to our listeners out there, keep questioning, keep exploring, keep challenging your assumptions.
Don't be afraid to dive deep into the topics that interest you.
And remember that the pursuit of knowledge is a lifelong journey.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Until next time, 10 CDA.